know Dale a little bit, and you guys are blessed to have her working at MACHE and serving you all. And I just really thank you again for joining us. I've got a ton of information to share with you. This is kind of a one-on-one and it's an overview, but you're going to leave, I hope, with a lot of really practical application at things that you can apply in a practical way, and also maybe with some information about things you weren't familiar with. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I like to start off by just sharing my goals, and I'll spend just a second on this. So, we're going to talk about scheduling, planning. We're going to talk about record keeping. I know a lot of people don't really like record keeping, but it is important. So, we'll talk about that. Dale asked me to make sure that we talked about IEPs. So, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about what an IEP is. Do you need one? How do I write my own? That sort of thing. We're going to talk about finding support and connection. That's so important when you're homeschooling any child, but especially when you have a child that learns differently, that has some special needs. We also just think it's so important to emphasize getting to know your child, which homeschooling allows you a front row seat in that education piece. And so we're going to talk about that. I'm going to explain what accommodations and modifications are and how you can apply those no matter what curriculum you're using. And then we're going to finish up our time together by just covering just good old teaching strategies, some best practice. So we're going to jump into it right away. First of all, let's talk about planning. I loved this when I started homeschooling because I'd been a classroom teacher for a long time, and my plan for the year just got handed to me, the calendar. The school district told me how many days I got off for Christmas, which they started calling winter break, and I didn't appreciate that too much. But I had no real say in any of that. But as you're starting the year, and I know we're a few months in now. I'm assuming some of you might be starting just now. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But as you get started, it's good to think about what's my start date? What's my end date? When am I going to stop homeschooling? And then as you're doing that, kind of think through how much time do I want to take off for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for spring break? Am I going to take a spring break? Do I have a family wedding coming up or a birthday that we're going to have to travel for? So those are all things to think about. And then also think, do I want to have a 4-day week? Do I want to have a 5-day week? And most states, you're not really told how many days exactly you have to homeschool. And I'm pretty sure Minnesota falls in that category. So you can kind of decide that. Sometimes you might want to be involved in a co op, and that could be one of your days of school where you're not really doing all the planning, but you're getting through your curriculum program in 4 days instead of five. So those are all things to think about. And then I like to talk about weekly planning. Of course, there's daily planning and really almost hourly planning, but I think it's great to not only do the year of the calendar, but also think about what am I actually going to be doing every day as I'm homeschooling my children. Sometimes a weekly plan or even plans for the whole year are included in your curriculum program. So it's important to familiarize yourself with those plans, but also I like to encourage homeschool parents, and this might just be a throwback to my classroom days, but I really do see there's value in planning just a week ahead as opposed to a whole year ahead. And I know a lot of homeschool moms do that, and if that works for you, that's great. But the reason I say that is because plans change. And if you get too far ahead and then your child needs 2 or 3 days on a lesson that the curriculum is suggesting can be taught in one, then it kind of throws everything off. So if you just do a week ahead plans for your own benefit, that kind of helps you to manage that a little bit better. And also, you can think about the past week. It's fresh on your mind, and you can think, you know, do I need to spend some more time on multiplication, or did I need to go over that lesson in English one more time? Yeah, I think I will. I'll pencil that in. And so it's just good practice. And then I always say, I mentioned this already, do it in pencil because things usually do change when children are involved or people are involved. Let's talk about that's kind of leading into record keeping and documentation. I took a sneak peek over at HSLDA, hslda.org. They have a place where you can check and see what you're required to do to comply with your homeschool laws. And so it says that your state requires that you maintain, I'm reading this documentation, indicating that the required subjects are being taught and proof that the tests required have been administered. So you're required in doing that to keep record of class schedules, the copies of materials used, and a description of your methods that were used in assessment. And if you have questions specifically about that, Dale says that that's on your website, so you can learn about the specific laws for your state on your website. But that's what's required as far as paperwork that you have to keep up with. But there's some other things that you might want to do as well. Even though I know I've talked to lots of homeschool moms that dread documentation. They just want to read books to their kids and enjoy teaching and do science experiments and the fun stuff. And please don't bother me with the documentation. But there's value in doing that as well. It's just good to keep good records. And we say that especially when you have a child that has some special needs. If your homeschool ever came into question, keeping these records shows that you've gone above and beyond what even your state is requiring of you. And if someone ever asked for, I don't know for what reason they would ask, but if they needed to know about attendance or grades, you would have it and you wouldn't have to recreate something that you did 3 years ago. So, attendance and grades, those are some things they aren't required, but it's good to keep record of that. Some people do report cards. Again, report cards aren't required by your state, but those are nice too. That's just where you would record final grades, like at a quarter and semester, and then for the final grade for the year. Um, Also, portfolios aren't required as far as I know. That's where you kind of tell the story of what you've been doing throughout the year. So you might save samples of your child's handwriting or a report that they did on using various different materials. And so you might want to save that because it's a sample of the year. It can be more detailed. It really kind of depends on what you want to do to kind of describe the year. So portfolio. And that's really a kind of a neat thing to do because it forces you to go back and look at what you were doing in September and October during maybe the month of January. And you're like, oh, I forgot that we did that. Oh, wow, his handwriting has really improved. I didn't realize that it improved that much. And so it's nice to be able to look back and pick out samples because it's an encouragement to you and your child that, wow, progress has really been made. We've kind of lost track of that. Another important record might be a written plan, like an IEP or a 504 plan that your child might have had through this when they were enrolled in public school, or a parent written plan. And we're going to talk about those too. So let me move on to this next part. Before we talk about those formal written plans, let's just take a few minutes and talk about testing. I have talked to so many mamas who are very concerned when testing, standardized testing is required for an annual assessment by their state. And so I just want, if this is your first year homeschooling in Minnesota, and it looks like, and Dale, you can jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like you have to administer a test, but I didn't see where that needs to be turned into anyone or
That's right. According to
necessarily.
Minnesota statute, we are required to do a norm reference standardized test at least once a year for each student between the ages of 7 and up to 17.
Okay.
But we are not required to turn them in anywhere. Those
Okay.
are for your records only.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So there are standardized tests. So those are those tests that you're required to do at the end of the year. And really, that's a comparison of how your child compares to other kids in that same grade level that are taking that test. A diagnostic test is something else that might be really helpful to you as a homeschool parent because that's going to really help you to see what does my child really know. And so it might just be a test just about math. And so when that test is finished, you'll be able to see, okay, my child can multiply, but when it comes to multiplying with decimals, we're really struggling, or my child can do this sort of measurement, but when it comes to this more sophisticated measuring, we're struggling. And so it's going to really be diagnostic in that it's telling you what do you need to focus on, what's already in place, what's a strength, but what's a weakness that we need to work on. I'm going to share this resource with Dale to pass on to you, but letsgolearn.com is a great place to get diagnostic testing. I believe those tests cost about $25. They have them for math and they have them for reading. So that would give you probably more information than you even want to know, but it is very diagnostic and really helps you to get some keen insights into where your child is at in those areas. Psychoeducational testing comes up a lot with our families that are homeschooling kids that are unique learners because that's going to be a test that's administered usually by a psychologist. They're going to give you your child is going, they're going to arrive at an IQ score and perhaps even help to see if there's a learning disability at play and if that's why your child might be struggling. All right, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time about standardized tests because that can be so upsetting, even when you don't have to turn the test scores in, because a lot of our kids are really become very anxious under a very formal testing situation, which standardized tests typically are. But I wanted to let you know that there are timed tests, there are untimed tests, there are paper and pencil tests. Like maybe you might remember when you were a kid that you filled in those little circles, but there are also digital or computer based formats for that testing. There are even options that are more oral options. So they're almost like conversation, and your child doesn't really have to write anything. And so that's a really great option for kids that are going to have difficulty with a typical standardized test because these oral tests are for usually they're going to have like an age bracket of um, 5 to 98. And so what's going to happen is the tester, the administrator of the test will start the test, and based on your child's answers, then they'll either stop that section or they'll keep moving until your child misses a certain number of questions. And so it's not like your child has to take a third grade standardized test because he's in the third grade. There are standardized tests that are oral, but they're more developmentally appropriate for kids that would struggle with a typical testing situation. Again, I'm going to share with Dale lots of different places where you can get those tests. And typically, if you're going to do a regular standardized test, the price range is anywhere from $25 per test to around 40 for those oral tests like the Peabody or the Woodcock Johnson. Um, a licensed person has to administer those. So those are typically around $100 to $150. So it's up to you what you'd like. But I just wanted to set your hearts at ease that there are options for kids that have are going to really struggle and feel uncomfortable taking a typical standardized test. All right, so let's talk about these more formal written plans. If your child was in public school prior to homeschooling, they may have had an IEP. So IEPs, that stands for Individualized Education Program. It falls under a federal law called that's kind of tagged IDEA. It stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Those are plans are written by school personnel for homeschoolers, they're not required, and there are very few states where they're required. So if your child was in public school last year and had an IEP, you're not required to continue that IEP unless for some reason you wanted to. And even then, the IEP probably would not remain exactly as it was because a lot of it's not going to apply to the homeschool setting. And I don't even know, the last point there is it's not always an option. And I apologize, I'm not sure. And Dale, I'm going to let you jump in again just for specifics on Minnesota. Um, I'm not sure that that's even an option in Minnesota to have an IEP or to get access to school services. Can you remind
It
me
is an
about that?
option. They
Okay.
can get school services if their child is diagnosed with some kind of a learning disability or if they need assessment.
Okay.
Going back to testing, if your child scores below 30 percentile on the total battery of scores, not just in one section, then you
Right.
are required to get help. The statute doesn't tell us exactly what that help looks like or where you need to get it. You could write to MACHE at info@mache.org and we will help you find the help that you need. And so we will contact you and talk you through it and kind of see where you're at. And it sometimes it also depends on the school district. Some school districts are more equipped to help than others. And so we need to kind of work with them on that as well. But I know in the Twin Cities metro area, mostly they're pretty happy to help out if they can.
All right. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for
Mhm.
that, the specifics. All right. Some of you might be familiar or you might not. Maybe you've just heard of a 504 plan. So, a 504 plan falls under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it's basically just saying that um, under federal law, all students should have access to their education. So, again, this is a plan that's written by school personnel and I always like to give this example of how a 504 plan would differ maybe from an IEP. So a 504 plan could be very broad. It could be like a little boy that I had in my kindergarten class one year. He was in an accident. He had something happen at home, and he broke his legs, both of his legs, and so he was wheeled in a wheelchair, and he was 5. And so they did not want him to have to come to school and try to navigate a wheelchair as a kindergartner. And so the school district wrote up a 504 plan for that child to make an accommodation that they would send a homebound teacher to work with this little guy so many times a week so he could kind of keep up with what we were doing in the classroom. So, but then when he was recovered, he came back to the classroom and his 504 plan went away. IEPs are typically for 1 year and they're going to have specific goals that the school district is working towards. Usually that's going to fall to the regular classroom teacher or the special education teacher or maybe the speech therapist, but they'll have certain goals. And usually that's understood that that IEP is going to be in place for 1 year and then they'll reevaluate. And so it's very different. 504 plans aren't, they might have an accommodation for a child that has some vision issues to sit up close in the classroom, but they're not going to have a reading goal written in them. So I hope that helps. So I wrote that 504 plans are not required and possibly then they're not even necessary in the homeschool setting because if you had a child who had a 504 plan because of needing to be in a quiet location or to have certain kind of testing situation, you're probably just going to do that normally anyway. Homeschooling in and of itself can so much be an individualized education plan, and you can provide accommodations, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. So, if IEPs are not required, and 504 plans are not required in order to homeschool. Don't I need some kind of plan? Well, you might want one, and so you can do your own parent written plan that would be similar to an IEP, where you would have goals written out for your child, and they might be academic, pertaining to math or reading or handwriting, or they might be behavioral, where we're going to really work on controlling ourselves and keeping our hands to ourselves and not interrupting or using a quieter voice, those kinds of things. But you can write that by yourself. And I'm going to get into it more specifically here in just a few minutes. But yes, you might want to do that, and we'll talk about why. Um, they go by several different names at SPED Homeschool. We call our plan a homeschool IEP, but some organizations or people call them an IHIP, like an individualized home plan, or an SEP, a student education plan. They go by lots of different names. But since we're not regulated as homeschoolers, you can call your plan whatever you'd like to call your plan. And there are lots of templates available, and I'm going to share with you one of those places where you can get a template to write your own plan. But why would you want to do that? It seems like a lot of trouble. Well, for one thing, it's a complete plan for your child. It's all in one place. As I mentioned before, any goals that you have for your child, things that you think, if I could just get these two or three things, really make some traction and get some movement going in a positive direction with these two or three areas, then it would make such a big difference. And so you could write that goal out. And I don't know about you, but I often have lots of ideas and lots of great things that I want to accomplish, and it's all in my head. But until I write it out, sometimes I forget about what my grandiose plans are. And so that's the same idea with this parent written plan, that it's just good when you write goals out, you tend to address those goals. Also, your parent written plan could be a documentation of your child's strengths. Now, I know we're always focused about the things we're worried about, but it's a good place to just sit back and write out what is my child good at? What are some strengths? What are weak areas? What therapies did I have in place? What interventions did I try? Did I do counseling in second grade? If you write it out in that plan, you're going to have that there, and you don't have to try to remember it. If it ever comes up a few years later, where someone's saying, well, tell me what you've tried. You've already have that written down on your plan. It's also a good place where you're going to write out any accommodations that you're making for your child to support your child. And we'll go into that in a few minutes, and modifications that you've made to the curriculum too. So we have a free download. We call it our homeschool IEP. I'm going to send you the link so you can check that out if you would like to write your own parent written plan. So, are there any questions? This is kind of one of those transition times, Dale, that I was telling you about. We're going to make a little bit of a change. Does anybody have any questions that I can answer about IEPs
Right
or?
now, there isn't, but I did have one for
Okay,
myself,
sure.
which I get a lot of questions on. Why would, as a homeschooler, how does an IEP help me?
Okay, sure. So typically, it may not be something that is going to come up in conversation or something that's required when your children are younger, but when it does pop up is when your kids get older and they start entering high school. And so maybe your child's going to take the SAT or the ACT. When you're filling out the application to get accommodations on those tests, like maybe you think your child needs extra time, or your child has ADHD and you think they need extra breaks, that sort of thing. They're going to ask on that application process, does this child have a formal written plan in place? And so if you've written your own plan, you can say, yes, he does or she does. And so that's one time. Also, um, when your child goes to off to college, um, the college is probably they're not going to ask, did your child have an IEP or do you have an IEP? But again, it's such a great place to document what kind of accommodations you have in place, any kind of therapies you have in place. It's just great even for your student to have access to, so that they would know even better how to advocate for themselves when they get off to college, and they can look back and go, oh, I've done this for so long, getting extra time on a test or testing in a quiet location. I didn't really know that that was something special. I just thought that's just the way we do it. And yet, when you get on in the college setting, that might be an accommodation that the professor would allow. And so having it in a document be helpful for your student as well. Also, when there are situations where kids are trying to get in a specialized program, maybe there's a specialized program in your community for kids that are on the autism spectrum, but in some way you need to document what you're doing to support your child, or that they have a formal written plan that's similar to an IEP. That would be another situation that sometimes pops up when people are really glad to have that in place. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And we have another question.
Okay.
Haven writes that she needs a lot of help developing an IEP for several children after being assessed. Where can she find the link? It will be in the description of this webinar
Yes.
when I upload it onto YouTube. And are there specific examples for reading and writing struggles?
Um, I can't remember. I'm pretty sure that we do have a link for goals for reading and writing struggles, but I'll make a note to myself. I'm going to do that right now to add a link if it's not there. So because what you can do, there are places that you can literally just write in IEP goals for writing for a third grader or something, or IEP goals for reading short passages for a fifth grader. And someone who has already written those up, and then you would just need to read through them and say, does this make sense to me? Is this where my child is? Yes, I think it is. The other thing, if your student is working with anyone like a speech therapist, anyone that's, a tutor even, they would be able to help you come up with some goals as well. So those are other options. You don't have to be as teacherese as a special education teacher would be when he or she are writing an IEP for the school district. Those goals are going to be um, given a short passage. The student will be able to read with 70% accuracy in 1 minute. I mean, like, it's going to be very specific. You don't have to talk like that. It just needs, really, because this plan is typically written for you by you. It needs to make sense. You don't need to say, my kid will read better, because then you don't really know if you met the goal. But if it is something like, my student will be able to uh, write a complete sentence using capitalization and punctuation with 80% accuracy, that's like, you can know whether or not that goal was met. And so um, anyone that you're working with could probably help you narrow that down as well. We could do a whole session just about IEPs and SEPs. So all right, I'm going to move on here to just finding support and different types of support. Um, there are co-ops that are available. And Dale, I know this, you weren't talking about co-ops, but you said that you've got a few resource centers that are popping up around the state. And so, definitely encourage you to check that out just for support. Also, there are homeschool support groups. I know I have a friend in Virginia. She just has a mom's night out once a month, and then about 3 times a year, they'll have a service project that the moms will do, and they'll bring their kids in as well. And so there are groups like that. There are virtual groups, which that's something that we're really trying to put together at spedhomeschool.com. We call it our homeschool heroes. I'm going to share a link to that, but that's where you can connect with other moms across the country or across your state in a virtual type setting. Of course, MACHE has Facebook groups too, so that's a way to connect. And then, like I was mentioning when we were talking about IEPs just now, if your child's working with a therapist, a speech therapist, OT, PT, counselors, tutors, be sure to talk to those folks and say, not just say, how did he do, but also say, what can we do this week? Or with your speech therapist, especially, you could say, hey, we're working on, we're going to be doing a unit study on Christmas around the world. Could you do you have any ways to kind of tie that into what you're doing in speech therapy? So you can work together as a team, and that's a way to find support as well. So make good use of those people. They're part of your support system. And then if you're like, I don't know where to find these people, part of that is just sharing by word of mouth, telling one person who could tell another person, hey, I'm looking for a great speech therapist in this area. Do you know who I could talk to? Utilizing social media, that's just such an amazing way to connect with people that you don't know, but people you know who might know someone who could help you. There are search tools out there. Again, HSLDA has a search tool for homeschool groups. We are we're building a recommended providers section of our website that you can look at. It's pretty small right now, but we're building that. That would be another avenue to find support. And then sometimes you just have to create your own. If you're looking for a co-op and it seems like everything you're running into just isn't going to work for you either financially or just time-wise or it's too far away, sometimes you just have to kind of start small and create what it is you're looking for. I've been in that situation before, and just we just started really small, and now I we actually moved from that area, and it's we've been gone for 7 years, but that co-op that we started really small, just with a handful of families. We met in each other's homes every couple of weeks and we rotated. That's now like a full-fledged co-op with lots and lots of families. Is still going strong about 9 or 10 years later. So sometimes you have to do that. If you can't find a speech therapist, you may have to just um, research and find out all that you can about your child's needs, which we're going to talk about more here in just a few minutes. So, as you're looking for a co op, or you're looking for a therapist, or you're looking for a counselor, these are some things to think about. Think about what it is you're looking for. And sometimes it helps to just write those things down because it gives you clarity and focus. Think about the cost, the schedule, how far you're going to drive, and also just their openness to working with homeschoolers if it's some sort of therapist, or if their willingness to work with homeschoolers if it's that have diverse learning needs, if it's a co-op, because that is tricky sometimes. So those are some things to think about and to be looking for. So I'm switching gears just a little bit here too, where, we were talking about sometimes finding a co-op that is welcoming and can understand your child who has learning challenges. Well, what do we mean by a learning challenge? To me, a learning challenge is anything that shuts down learning. And often things like autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, that's a learning disability that affects math, Down syndrome, which is a genetic disorder, or FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome disorders. Those are conditions that happen when a child's been exposed to alcohol in the womb. Those are things that definitely are going to cause some learning challenges and often will shut down learning for one reason or another. But that's not the only thing that will shut down learning. There are other learning challenges too, like anxiety. And I just was reading that the CDC data back in 2021 said that, I'm going to just read this so I get it correct, 37% of high school students reported feeling persistently sad or hopeless, a key indicator of mental health issues, including anxiety. And so, anxiety is really high right now. And when kids are feeling that way, it's really difficult to help to get them motivated to do their schoolwork. And so, their learning is being shut down for that reason. So, that's a learning challenge. Sometimes our kids' behavior shuts down learning, not only for them, but for the whole family because it can be so disruptive. Sensory processing disorders, just difficulty processing input like noise or touch or visual stimuli can really cause a kid to just lose it and not be able to carry on for the rest of the day. And of course, like there are medical and physiological needs too that can shut down learning. So here's some things to look for and to consider. because sometimes we want to take a wait and see approach. And I totally get that. I have done that before, but what I've discovered as a parent is that time flies by so quickly. And so sometimes I don't think most people regret. I wrote this at the bottom of that screen. Most people don't regret investigating these things too soon. So if your child seems to be working too hard, or if they're having difficulty following directions, or difficulty with fine motor skills beyond what your other kids were doing, if they're easily frustrated, or they're not meeting their milestones on time, or maybe they're even meeting them too soon or in a strange order, those would all be kind of things to be concerned about and not just brush off, but to really take some time and either, at the very least, learn about what's going on with your child by doing your own search, reading books, checking out websites, different things like that. But you might even want to talk to your pediatrician about some of those things. But the main thing is that we want to encourage you to become an expert of your child. I don't know where you are, ladies, in your where your kids are coming from, what your experience has been in education thus far, if you've had your children in public school or private school. But it is very easy, especially when our lives are so busy, to just leave that to the experts, and now you get to be the expert because you're homeschooling your child. And so it's a perfect time and a perfect environment to just take the time to reflect and to really watch your child and to notice, like I was saying earlier, not only the things that you're concerned about, like why is he struggling to read this passage? This shouldn't be so hard, but also their strengths. Wow, he is really good at taking things apart and seems very mechanical. That's pretty amazing. So it's really good to reflect those things. And then if your child does have a diagnosis like ADHD or autism, Down syndrome, those things that we talked about earlier, research those things as you can. I know that Dr. Google can be kind of dangerous at times, so we don't want to overwhelm our brains or to read too much negativity, but it is good to learn all that you can about these different conditions and to find out what's available for help, because that helps you then to serve your child much better and to help them to reach their full potential. So when we're talking about them meeting their full potential and meeting their needs appropriately, and we're homeschooling, so the question is always asked, what curriculum is best for my child who has Down syndrome, or what curriculum is best for my child who has ADHD? And I'm going to kind of skip down to the bottom of the screen there where it says I hate to tell you this, but there isn't a perfect curriculum program, and there isn't. But let's just talk about some basics here. First of all, if your child has a reading issue, I really encourage you to find a program that says, and usually they'll say this pretty right up front, we are Orton Gillingham based. You want to find something that is based on the Orton Gillingham approach is the gold standard for working with kids that have reading difficulties. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which I don't have time to go into, or just maybe they'll say, we are based on the science of reading. So look for a reading program that mentions those two things, either one or the other, science of reading or Orton Gillingham based. Does your student are there auditory processing issues? So that means your child doesn't have any difficulty physically hearing. He can hear all right, but something's happening in the brain where what's heard is taking way too long to get to that language processing part of the brain. And they often kind of look like they're lost in space or a little confused because they might have heard the first thing you said and the last thing that you said, but everything in the middle got a little bit muddled. So if you have a student that has auditory processing or language processing disorders, you'll probably want to stay away from programs that require a lot of listening. And I'll just give you a specific example. I love sunlight, but sunlight, especially in the early the early grades, requires a lot of listening. It's a lot of you as the mama reading aloud to your child. And so, probably as much as I love that program, that may not be the best pick for your child that has some auditory processing issues. If you have a child that craves structure, and this isn't always the case, but a lot of times children that are on the autism spectrum, they like routine, they like structure, they like everything very predictable. So you might want to find just a no nonsense textbook, workbook based program for a child that has that going on. And then I just believe that a multisensory approach is great for all kids. So, multisensory approach, and I'm going to talk about this later when we get into the really practical stuff here in just a few minutes. But that basically means that the student isn't just listening. The student is going to have something to see. They're going to give you some ideas for having your child move and be involved, interacting with what you're doing. There might even be manipulatives for math and for reading and English. And so anything that gets the child using as many as their senses as possible, that's a great program. When I was a classroom teacher a million years ago, multisensory approach wasn't even something that was in the vernacular. But I remember I used to tell my little students that were my third graders, I would say, boys and girls, God gave us, I did this in the public school, but I would say, God gave us five senses. And so we're going to try to use all of those five senses as much as we can when we do this science lesson today. We're going to touch and we're going to listen and we're going to look. And so, and if I could throw in some eating or tasting, I would do that too. So, it's just a great approach for all kids. So, if you have something that doesn't, a curriculum program that doesn't provide those types of ideas, maybe next year, just to save you some time so that you don't have to come up with those on your own, you might want to look for something that says, hey, we're a multisensory approach program. That would be some advice about curriculum. And much, 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 much more could be said, but we're going to move on because what if you've already bought your curriculum probably? So, what do I do? Well, what you're going to do to make that curriculum work is you're going to provide accommodations and you're going to make modifications if you need to. So let me define those words. An accommodation is a change that you make that allows your child to take in information or to demonstrate understanding. And you're not changing the content and you're not changing your expectation. So I'm going to give you a little example of that. When I was a classroom teacher, I can remember one day I was having my little kinders do a worksheet and they had to cut out with scissors and pictures because we were doing a rhyming activity. So on one side was a tree, and then there was a cat and a bee and something else on the other side that they had to cut out. And this one little boy, he was just, I mean, demolishing that worksheet. It was just cut into splinters. He could not cut. He could not cut. And so I was about to get him a new worksheet so he could try that cutting activity again. And then I thought to myself, what is my goal? I thought, this is not a cutting exercise. I'm not assessing them. I'm not checking to see how well everybody can cut. What I want to know is if he can recognize that tree and bee rhyme. And so instead of making him do that whole thing over again, I made an accommodation. I said, which one of these words or which one of these pictures rhymes with tree? And he said bee. And I was like, great, this child can rhyme. So that was a change in how he demonstrated his understanding of the lesson that I had just taught. Okay, and we're going to get into more details and examples in just a second. A modification, though, is different. That's a change that you make to the curriculum or to your child's learning goals to better suit his or her needs. So you might know that your child just really has an intellectual disability and they are 12, but they're just learning to read and they're just beginning to understand place value and counting money. Well, you're not going to insist that they do the curriculum program that typically developing 12-year-olds do. You're going to modify the plan and you're going to find the grade level and purchase the curriculum program that's at a grade level that's appropriate for your child. So that's a modification. And I'll give you more examples of modifications here in just a second. So here's some typical accommodations. That would be things like giving an extra time for the test. It's not a different test, same test, you're just giving extra time to complete the test. Audiobooks for kids that have dyslexia. Typically, kids that have dyslexia can comprehend at a really good level. They just can't read. And so let's give them the ability to read with their ear instead of their eyes. We'll let them use audiobooks and then they can carry on with the rest of the curriculum program. Maybe it's seating in a quieter place. Maybe it's giving oral answers instead of written work because spelling is so tough and their handwriting is atrocious right now. So you're not changing the questions, you're just changing how the child's going to give their answers so that you can find out have they learned this. A modification, though, would be simplifying the tasks and assignments. An example, maybe a high school freshman might need to write a 3-page report about photosynthesis. And for a child, if you're going to modify that, it might be just write 2 sentences explaining photosynthesis, or draw a picture that shows me what's happening in photosynthesis. A reduced number of questions, and that doesn't mean that is a modification, but a lot of times we'll say, hey, on this math page, you can just do the even questions. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we're only going to require 2 or 3 questions to be answered as opposed to 15. We're reducing what's required, and so it's not at the same level as their peers. And then I already mentioned the example of using lower grade level materials. So those are all examples of modifications. Okay, any questions about that? Anything in the chat, Dale, about modifications, accommodations,
Yes, we did
curriculum?
have
Okay.
one question on Orton Gillingham.
Okay.
Um, one of our moms found one has dyslexia, which means he has a heart, and he also affects his auditory processing. So she was
Okay.
looking at the Orton Gillingham dyslexia books on Amazon and wondered if those would be good for him. And she also has others with ADD and mood disorders. So she's very
Okay.
tired. Could use a little
Yes.
bit of help.
Yes. So I don't know what's on Amazon. There are some popular reading intervention programs that are available for homeschoolers. So one is The Logic of English. It's mainly for younger kids, really. Um, Susan Barton's program, the Barton system, is essentially Orton Gillingham based. It doesn't cover spelling, I don't think. And also, oh my goodness, the name All About Reading and All About Spelling is Orton Gillingham based. So those are 3 off the top of my head. And then a computer based program, which might be helpful for this mom, since she's got more than one child. It's computer based. Um, it is a little pricey. The last time I checked, I think it was $199 for access for 12 months, but it is it's very intuitive to the student, and they have a program that is for younger kids, and then they have one that's for ages 10 and up too, which is nice. So kids that are working at a really lower level, but maybe they're older and they don't like all the babyish graphics, that's a good option too. um, and I think that for the other children that have the mood disorder, and I don't remember the other thing that you mentioned specifically. What was that?
Um, ADD.
ADD. Okay. So some of these things, these tips for success, I'm going to share those. And I think that's kind of like if you can try to implement some of these things and just keep these in front in your mind as much as possible, I think it's going to help you, because there isn't necessarily a curriculum for kids that have ADD or ADHD other than again, and it really depends on your child. um, they may not love structure and crave structure, but they might need structure. So you might want something that's very predictable that you guys can kind of get into a routine with, and they might actually feel some comfort in that. But really, there isn't a curriculum necessarily for that, but other things that looking for curriculum that have that multisensory tag about it, where they're giving you different options for teaching and also for your options for your kids to be able to interact with the program. Usually, kids that have ADHD appreciate that. They don't like just sitting and listening and writing. They like to be able to be engaged. So, let me just go over these some tips. This is general advice. And you're going to hear this word from me probably multiple times, but it's be flexible. You need to always be making changes based on your child's needs and progress. And that's why I said at the very beginning, I always wrote my lesson plans in pencil because your kiddos may have 2 or 3 days where everything's just going just wonderfully, just like you wanted it to, just like clockwork. And then you might have this day where you're just banging your head against the wall because your child is, just super anxious or just having difficulty getting out of the bed, or maybe they have a migraine. And I mean, the learning is shut down, and so we need to make some changes and we have to be flexible. um and that can look like different things. It might mean, okay, we were going to I was going to have my student just do some silent reading in this chapter book that we're doing. But I think instead we'll just all gather on the couch and I'll read it out loud today. Or we'll just listen to that. I can maybe find that on an audio book and we'll listen to it during lunch. So you just kind of make some changes to make things fit what's going on in your household that day. Also, I just would encourage you to celebrate small victories and focus on progress and the things that your children are great at and good at. I remember talking to a mama several years ago that she had been so concerned about her child's learning needs that she had spent any extra cash they had on tutors and just intervention programs and different things like that. And actually, her daughter was quite gifted in music and art, and she loved horseback riding, and yet they didn't have time for that because they had tutoring and they had this therapy and they had that therapy. And when the mom called me, her daughter was in eighth or ninth grade and was just wanting to drop out of school because she was just beat down and exhausted. And so I really encourage you to celebrate small victories. Be looking for those. Have your eyes peeled for those, and don't always just be laser focused on what's hard for your child, but also just give them a chance to really nurture their things that God has gifted them in. Also, just promote independence. And we're going to talk about this in just a few minutes too, but you might be giving a lot of support and giving a lot of accommodations at one point, but just because they were appropriate at one time in your student's life doesn't mean that it always has to stay that way. So um, maybe um, maybe your child needed extra time to complete a test, but maybe say, hey, when you take this next test, let's just experiment and let's see if you can do it with just 5 extra minutes instead of 15 extra minutes and see how you do. And if it's really difficult, we'll back up and we'll go back and I'll give you more time. But always be trying to gradually reduce the levels of support and stretching your child so that they don't become super dependent on those things too. Also, make the most of what your kid is interested in. If they love animals, just try to do as much as you can, tying in some animals in math and science or whatever. So those are things that I would encourage you to utilize. Also, just keep your expectations realistic. You may know that your child has ADHD. You may have done already what I encouraged you to do to become an expert in your child and in your child's needs. And yet, sometimes in the heat of the moment, especially if this is like the baby of the family or in the middle of the family, you might kind of fall back into, oh my goodness, why isn't he doing this? I know his brother was doing this by this time. And you start putting all this pressure on your child to meet a certain expectation that a sibling met or that you did when you were that age. And you got to remember what their needs are and just be have a realistic expectation for your child and for yourself. And then we already talked about using a multisensory approach. Really, that's great for all kids, especially during those younger years. And I gave that example of about when I was a classroom teacher and I would tell the kids that we were going to try to touch things and see things and maybe even eat things, taste things. But here's another example of multisensory that's really actually the research shows that this helps to really velcro information in your kid's brain. If you're teaching handwriting, for instance, it's a great idea to get the whole body involved. So and also the mouth moving where you're talking and you can say, okay, we're going to learn about letter B. That's where we start at the top, come straight down, halfway up and around. Let's do that together. And you have your child moving their body and then also saying those words. And then they take a pencil and then they do it on paper, start at the top, go straight down, halfway up and around. So that's a multisensory approach because you're using all these different senses, not just in a lesson, but actually at the same time. So that's really a powerful teaching tool that you can use no matter what curriculum that you're using. Um, this I wish I had tons of time to talk about, but I don't know if you're familiar with executive functioning. The mama that has the child with ADHD, you probably are because some of those things that you're dealing with ADHD fall, excuse me, under executive functioning. So in the resource handout that I'm going to share with Dale, I'm going to share this book called Smart But Scattered by Peg Dawson and Richard Guare. It was written several years ago, and since then they've kind of come up with all kinds of different practical uh, books. I think there's Smart But Scattered for teens, but it's talking about executive function, and executive function refers to the mental skills that you need to plan something, to stay focused, to remember instructions, to manage your behavior, and to do multiple tasks. So it has to do with being able to have sustained attention, to have metacognition, which is the ability to think about how you're thinking, to have impulse control falls under executive function, being able to manage your time, being able to control your emotions in an appropriate way, that falls under executive function. Being able to start a task and then persistence to finish the task has to do with executive function. Being able to organize physical things, yes, where the pencils are, but also just mentally to organize your thoughts. And in working memory, being able to hold on to information long enough to do something about it. That also falls under executive function. And then being flexible. Um, this is it's so important. Sometimes our kids really shut down because they are just inflate. They just have got to do it their way and they can't let go of that. And so it's important to teach them how to be flexible in their choices and in their thoughts. And then planning and prioritizing is really important. And again, I could do a whole hour just on executive function, but there's new research that's showing that if we just focus on those things, the executive function, and I would encourage you to get Smart But Scattered for Kids or go to their website where they'll have some really useful resources. But if you just focus on working on these things, it's going to make such a difference if your child has dyslexia, if your child has is on the autism spectrum, it's going to make such a big difference. I'm going to just spend, I've already hit the hour mark, so I want to be able to get to these last few slides, but um, it's important to give your child support. And sometimes, especially I know when you have multiple kiddos, it's difficult to do that. And sometimes we're tempted to, if you're working with a curriculum program that's online, to just let the curriculum program do everything. But I do encourage you to try to interact with your student, even if they are using a curriculum program, to maybe stop them for a second and say, hey, show me how you're doing that. Let's do some guided practice where You talk out loud what your approach is when you do a long division problem. Say it out loud because that helps give your child some language as they're um, trying to approach a multi-step problem. We assume that in my mind, if I start to do a long division problem and I think, okay, first I got to figure out how many times four going to go into one. It doesn't. Okay, well, how many times will four go into 14? Okay, it'll go three times. That's all going on in my mind. And I think everybody does that, but not everyone does that. And sometimes we have to teach our kids to do it. But anyway, I digress. But guided practice is basically when you come alongside your child and you're kind of working side by side and helping and guiding them through a new skill. Modeling is what I was just giving you an example of. You literally model in front of them how you would go to solve a problem, whether it's math problem, science problem, whatever it is. And then that gradual release is don't just because you're doing that now and it's needed, don't just assume that we're going to stay there for the rest of the school year. Gradually kind of pull back and don't give quite as much support and then see how they do. If they need more support, that's fine. But if they don't, then back off. Also, just providing hands-on activities. It keeps kids engaged and helps to reinforce concepts with real-world experiences. So you can do hands-on activities in math using counters and blocks and real-life tools. Like some curriculum math programs might give you a paper ruler. Well, don't instead of using the paper ruler, let's use the real ruler. Get a real ruler out or get real money out, that sort of thing. In science, go ahead, even though it takes more time and it's more messy, do the experiments because that's going to help that experience alone will be memorable to your child and help them to apply what they're learning in the textbook. And then I also wrote, just go outside. There's so much that we miss because we take outside for granted. I remember taking a class of kids outside. This one stands out to me. Um, we walked past a path that I drove by every single day, but when I took my little kiddos out there, guess what we found? A snake. We found a snake laying next to this driveway that I drove on every single day. But I missed it because I had never really taken the time to go out and just observe and look for things. And so go outside. In reading, you can use letter tiles, and most of those Orton Gillingham approach programs that are really like a reading intervention program, they're going to use letter tiles and sandpaper letters and word sorts and things like that. Um, all right. And then use visual cues. This is an example of the water cycle, and so those are pretty easy to find, like at a teacher store. Use diagrams like the ones that I have here in this Venn diagram because it helps kids to organize their ideas and to review material that you've covered or to prepare to do a writing lesson. It helps to organize their thoughts. Your child might need a visual cue to help them organize their day and to know what's coming next. So I showed you this pocket chart with different things that are going on throughout the day. And then use color codes. This is an example of where one third is always yellow and one half is always red, but you can do that with the different operation symbols. You can make all the plus signs, have your student take a highlighter and highlight all of those yellow and all the multiplication symbols are yellow and all the addition symbols are red and so forth and so on to help to tie in visual cues. Auditory learning cues, and I'm almost finished here, friends. That would be for a student, again, that has dyslexia, bookshare.org. If a student has a documentation of a learning disability in reading, like in dyslexia, bookshare.org is free and has hundreds, thousands of recorded books. Learning Ally is the largest library of human recorded books. There's a subscription cost for that, but um, they have lots of great textbooks that homeschoolers use have been recorded and are often available on Bookshare or Learning Ally. And so that's a great way for your student that has dyslexia to keep progressing through the curriculum, but be able to listen to the book instead of having to read it with their eyes. using music is such a powerful tool. I still remember songs that I learned when I was a little kid, and my girls are still singing songs that we learned when they were in second grade when we were memorizing the states of the United States. They're still singing those little songs, so it sticks in your mind. Music is a powerful tool, so make use of it when you can. And then also, if you have a child that has auditory needs, often it just even having them repeat the directions. What did I say that you're going to do next? Go ahead and tell me that out loud. That helps. And they could even record that in a recording device on a phone or some other tool to help give a little bit of novelty to having to record that. Because I know some kids that are like, Mom, I don't want to have to say that out loud. But if you give them something techie, they might like it better. So that was a lot. I know. I hope that this was helpful to you. When I was a classroom teacher, if I could come away with one or two things that I could implement the next day I was in with my students, I thought that was time well spent. So I hope that I've given you some ideas, some practical strategies that you can use to engage your child. And, I just want to emphasize that you get to decide. No one, you don't have to ask permission to give accommodations to your child or to make the decision to teach a lesson a certain way. Even if it's written in the textbook, you can change it up to make it work for your students. So I hope that you're coming away from our time together with several ideas that you can start using right away. And I will take any other questions that we've got, Dale.
Okay, guys, any questions that you have that we have not answered? Give you all a minute to kind of process.
I know that was a lot, especially at the end. Sorry, I was
That's
rushing.
okay. I just want to remind everybody that this will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel in the next, I would say in the next week or so. And then you can, pause and take notes and, and all the links that that Krisa was talking about will be on there. Do you give one-on-one help, and is there a fee, Krisa? That's something that's
Um,
being asked.
That's a great question. I don't give one-on-one help at this time, but at SPED Homeschool, we are hoping to launch some one-on-one assistance in the new year. I'm not sure if it's going to be right at the first of the new year or not. But one thing that you can access right away is at least some community help. And also we have some groups on our website, the SPED Homeschool website. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my picture. I need to look at the camera here. On the SPED Homeschool website, we have groups that were started by people that are expert in the field. So that's something if you're a member, you can access at any time to get some answers, at least in that type of setting. We also have some gals that are listed in our recommended providers section. I'm not sure what their fees are, but they do provide one-on-one consultations too. We've got a few ladies on there that do that.
I would encourage you to check out the SPED Homeschool website. There is a vast array of free resources on there that would be very, very helpful to you, and groups to get involved in, and different things like that. If you are a member of MACHE, I know that there is ways that we can plug you more into
Yes,
schooling.
and I'm sorry, Dale, I'm going to interrupt you because I forgot. I'm just completely. You guys are very special because you just are. You're special and you're unique. And actually, um, we do offer if you're a member of Mache, you can get one-on-one help through SPED Homeschool. You just need to. I think there's a link on your website, Dale,
Yes.
that and maybe you can I'm not sure where that's at, but if you'll click that link to get help, you can get free one-on-one consultations because of a contract that we have with Mache. So
Yeah.
yes, that's something that's available to you, and I apologize for
That's
not
okay.
having that in my realm. Sorry about
That's
that.
okay. That will be on the description of this webinar on YouTube. So
Okay.
you will get some. You could get some more help there. You can always contact Mache, and if you need to, we can help you find somebody who could help you as well. So you never have to be alone. I mean, there's always going to be somebody who has your back. We want you to be able to homeschool your children, and we want you to have all the resources and everything that you need for that, to be successful in that. And that's our
Yes.
ultimate goal as an
Yes.
organization with MACHE and with SPED Homeschool. The whole reason we're doing what we're doing is because you can do this, and all you need
Yes.
is resources. And so you don't have to be the one to dig up all those resources. We actually have them for you. And that saves so much brain space for you. And we want to be that for you. So
Yes.
I had a child who struggled a little bit with some special education type things. And I didn't have the resources. And, you know, God just meets us where we are, and he did help me. However, we are so blessed to be in a country homeschooling where there are a lot of opportunities to get help. And so never ever believe the lie that you have to figure this out on your own, because that's not the truth. You can always contact us and we will get you in connection with somebody.
That's right.
Yep.
One other thing I'm going to mention, unfortunately I didn't have the discount code, but I'm also going to share a discount code with you, Dale.
Okay.
I'll hopefully get that tomorrow or in the next couple of days.
Yep.
But that'll be I believe for 20% off the subscription price to be a paying member. We have a free membership, but to be able to access even more on our website, we're going to give a 20% off discount, and then a 20% off anything that we have in our store. If we have upcoming events, you could get 20% off of that as well. So I'll have a discount code to share with you. I just didn't have
Awesome.
that available tonight.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Any other questions that we did not answer for you? Well, you guys, thank you so much for hanging in there with us, and thank you for coming. And again, this will be posted on our YouTube channel soon, and you can revisit it and refer back to it. And yeah, we just appreciate you guys so much. And please check out SPED Homeschool on the internet, and also check out mache.org. We don't have a lot of stuff on our website for special ed right now. We are getting a brand new website, and hopefully that will be something that we will be adding. So, but we will be there. We've got resources. So if you have any questions, just email us and we will get you the help that you need.
Absolutely. And again, you just follow that link on the MACHE website, and you can have a free consultation with
Yep.
one of the gals that's partnered with Peggy
Yep.
Lawyer through SPED Homeschool for free. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.